Welcome back, deep divers. We're all about getting to the heart of things here, right? No fluff, just straight to those aha moments.
Exactly. Today, we're going deep, like really deep, into 1 Kings chapter 16.
Buckle up. It's a wild ride through ancient Israel, full of kings, power struggles, and some, well, let's just say some serious consequences.
It's like an ancient leadership drama, but with some surprisingly relevant lessons for us even today.
Okay, so 1 Kings 16, it throws us right into the thick of things with a whole bunch of kings coming and going fast. Baasha, then his son Elah, then a guy named Zimri, who, spoiler alert, doesn't last long at all.
7 days.
Yeah, 7 days. Then comes Omri, setting the stage for the infamous Ahab. It's a lot to unpack, but the main thread running through it all, the impact of leadership, especially when it goes against, well, let's just say divine principles.
It's a cycle, a pattern of choices and consequences that plays out in a really powerful way in this chapter.
All right, so let's start with Bashar. The chapter begins with him being, I guess you could say, promoted by God.
Yeah.
He goes from a pretty ordinary background to becoming a leader.
Talk about upward mobility, right? But, and this is a big but, he ends up following in the footsteps of, well, a pretty bad example, Jeroboam.
Oh, yeah, Jeroboam, infamous for those golden calves and all that.
Exactly. The text says Baasha basically walked in the way of Jeroboam and even led Israel into sin, which, yeah, not a good look.
And that's when things go south, right? Like really south.
There's this prophecy against Baasha and his whole family, and it's not pretty. It talks about his descendants being wiped out, like, completely.
And it gets specific, right? Like dogs eating some and birds eating others.
It's intense. It paints a picture of total destruction and disgrace. This wasn't just losing an election. It was being utterly rejected.
And as we read on, that's exactly what happens. Baasha's son, Elah, takes the throne. But 2 years later, he's assassinated by his own chariot commander, Zimri. And get this. While Elah was, shall we say, indulging a bit too much.
Wine? Lots of wine.
Right. Zimri doesn't stop there. He goes on to kill Baasha's entire family.
Brutal.
Absolutely brutal. And the text is clear. This wasn't just some random power grab. It was a direct fulfillment of that prophecy we talked about. It's a stark reminder, even thousands of years later, about accountability, about the ripple effects of our choices, especially when we're in positions of leadership.
And then there's Zimri himself, the king, for a week.
7 days.
7 days. Talk about a short-lived reign. What's the big takeaway from Zimri's brief but bloody moment in the spotlight?
Well, ambition without a solid foundation, moral or otherwise, it's a recipe for disaster. He took power through violence and betrayal, but he didn't have the people on his side. The army was off fighting the Philistines, and when they heard what happened, they rallied around their commander, Omri, instead.
So Zimri's little coup, it backfired big time. Big time. Omri besieged the city where Zimri was holed up, and rather than face defeat, Zimri, well, let's just say he went out in a blaze of glory, literally. He set fire to the palace and died in the flames. It's presented as the consequence of his actions, of leading the people astray.
Okay, so after all that chaos, Omri takes over. He manages to unite the kingdom, builds a new capital in Samaria. Things seem to be stabilizing a bit.
You'd think so, right? Outwardly, things looked more stable, but beneath the surface, the same issues were still simmering. The text says Omri did worse than all that were before him.
So same old problems, just a new, fancier capital.
Basically, he continued the same practices that got the previous kings in trouble. It's a good reminder that just because things look good on the outside doesn't mean everything is okay on the inside.
And then comes Ahab, Omri's son, and oh boy, does the Bible have some things to say about him.
It's not a glowing review, that's for sure. The text calls him the most wicked king yet. He didn't just continue the bad stuff, he took it up a notch.
And a big part of that was his wife, Jezebel.
Right, Jezebel. She was from Sidon, and she brought her own gods and beliefs with her. Ahab went all in, building temples to Baal and really going against everything that was supposed to be sacred in Israel.
It's interesting, though, that even in the middle of all this, the book mentions the rebuilding of Jericho and how it led to tragedy, just as Joshua had prophesied centuries earlier.
That's a really good point. Even amidst all this human drama and bad choices, God's word was still coming true. It reminds us that there's a bigger picture at play, a divine plan, even when things seem chaotic.
So looking at all these kings, all these mistakes and consequences, what are some of the timeless lessons we can learn from this ancient drama?
Well, first off, leadership matters. Big time. The choices these kings made, they affected everyone around them, and that's true today, too. Whether you're a CEO, a teacher, a parent, the decisions you make have an impact.
And it's scary how they kept making the same mistakes. It's like they didn't learn anything from those who came before them.
Right, that's the danger of not learning from history. We can fall into those same traps if we're not careful. We need to be intentional about breaking those cycles, about doing things differently.
And it's not enough to just make things look good on the surface, like Omri did with Samaria. If the underlying issues aren't addressed, the problems are just going to keep popping up.
Exactly. An unchecked ambition, like we saw with Zimri, that never ends well. True leadership requires integrity, a moral compass, a genuine desire to serve those you lead.
And the consequences, wow, they weren't just felt in the moment. Ahab's choices, they had ripple effects that lasted generations.
It's a sobering reminder that our actions have consequences, not just for us, but for those who come after us. We need to think long-term, act responsibly, and consider the impact of our decisions.
So even though this is ancient history, it still speaks to us today. It can even strengthen our faith, right? How does looking at this ancient drama affect how we see faith today?
Well, for me, one of the most striking things is how God's sovereignty is woven through the whole narrative. The prophecies being fulfilled, the consequences following actions. It points to a deeper order, a sense of justice.
So even in the midst of all the human messiness, there's this sense that things are ultimately in God's hands.
Exactly. And that can be really reassuring. It reminds us that even when things seem chaotic, there's a bigger plan at play.
And it reinforces the idea that standing up for what's right, holding leaders accountable, that's not just a political or social issue. It's aligned with a deeper truth.
Absolutely. And understanding the consequences of turning away from God, like we saw so clearly in this chapter, that can be a powerful motivator for us to make better choices, to live in a way that aligns with our values.
So 1 Kings 16, it's a story about kings and power struggles, but it's also a story about choices and consequences, about integrity and accountability, about the enduring power of faith.
It leaves us with a lot to think about, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question. How can the lessons from this ancient text inform your own life, your own leadership, your own journey of faith?
What patterns might you need to break? What choices can you make today to create a better tomorrow?
Lots to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.